Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now going to work with the first poem of the Autumn Rivulets section, the 38 poems. This poem is called As Consequent, and then the etc. will be provided. The only time in Leaves of Grass that Whitman will utilize this one. Now, this is the only real poem of all of Autumn Rivulets that makes direct reference to that very theme of autumn rivulets, and we'll obviously be studying why. Now, I pause today as I give this lecture, the 12th of December 2022, to pay homage and respects to my dear friend Kevin Tonkovich, the great teacher of Worland High School from 1984 to 2017. For 33 years, he challenged all of us, and today he passed. And I am dedicating this lecture, both sorrow and joy commingling in that river that we'll be referencing in this poem. Now, our assumptions are that you will have been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. Everything from the very first introductory word, come, to up and including a set of introductory comments for Autumn Rivulets. And it's my hope that you will have already studied that set of comments as we prepare now to turn to this poem. Now, we're always turning to our Nortons to get some information, and about this poem, Nortons will tell us this introductory poem, new to Leaves of Grass in 1881, carries forward the metaphor of the group title, the only one of the 38 overtly to do so. However, other poems in the cluster also project the mood of the title, such as The City Dead House, This Compost, Unnamed Lands, Outlines for a Tomb, Laws for Creation to a Common Prostitute, Cosmos, and Who Learns My Lessons Complete. We commented on this in our prior lecture. Although, As Consequent, etc. is new to the 1881 edition, two of its passages are transferred, as the footnotes indicate, from two poems of the 1876, now rejected for use here. The imagery of the poem is intricate. The wayward rivulets are both Whitman's own poems and the fructifying currents of the continent. The little shells cast up from the sea of time are also the tidings of his poems made out of his life and years. And the windrow drift of weeds and shells are a double metaphor. The poet's discoveries, weeds and shells, being distributed like a windrow on the sea and then drifting ashore to form another line, a windrow drift. Now, lines 13 through 15 were originally lines 10 through 12 of the two rivulets, and then lines 16 through 21 were originally lines 13 through 18 of the 1876, or From That Sea of Time. And lines 22 through 33 were originally lines 1 through 12 of the 1876, or From That Sea of Collect. And to vast, short for avast, meant to stop or to give up at line 22. Perhaps the meaning is bringing everything to the end of its voyage. And to that degree now, let's turn to the poem and let's enjoy the poem and an analysis of it. As Consequent. As consequent from store of summer rains, or wayward rivulets in autumn flowing, or many an herb-lined brook's reticulations, or subterranean sea rills making for the sea, songs of continued years I sing. Life's ever-modern rapids first, soon to blend with the old streams of death. Some threading Ohio's farm fields or the woods, some down Colorado's canyons from sources of perpetual snow, some half hid in Oregon, or away southward in Texas, some in the north finding their way to Erie, Niagara, Ottawa, some to Atlantica's bays, and so to the great salt brine. If you, whoe'er you are my book perusing, in I myself and all the world, these currents flowing, all toward the mystic ocean tending, currents for starting a continent new, overtures sent to the solid out of the liquid, fusion of ocean and land, tender and pensive waves, not safe and peaceful only, waves roused and ominous too. Out of the depths, the storm's abysmic waves, who knows whence, raging over the vast with many a broken spar and tattered sail. Or from the sea of time, collecting, vasting all, I bring a windrow drift of weeds and shells. Oh, little shells, so curious convolute, so limpid, cold, and voiceless. Will you, not little shells to the tympans of temples held, murmurs and echoes still call up, eternity's music faint and far, wafted inland, sent from Atlantica's rim, strains for the soul of the prairies, whispered reverberations, chords for the ear of the West, joyously sounding. Your tidings old, yet ever new and untranslatable, infinitesimals out of my life and many a life. For not my life in years alone I give, all I give, these waifs from the deep, cast high and dry, washed on America's shores. Now the poem is truly remarkable in the way in which it's constructed. Notice, we begin with, as consequent from store of summer rains. By the way, you'll remember consequent in spontaneous me, the consequent meanness of me. He will use it there the only other time. From consequent store of summer rains, or notice you've got three of these or wayward rivulets in autumn flowing. So now we're obviously to the major theme and the title of the collection of the 38 poems, Autumn Rivulets, right? That is to say about evolution, we're going to go from flowing to ever modern rapids to flowing again at currents flowing later, and then later who knows whence. So we've got this idea of movement. Or many an herb-lined brook's reticulations used only one time in All Leaves of Grass, it's right here. Or subterranean sea rills making for the sea. And then all of that he calls songs of continued years I sing. Now obviously so much of this poem will be a byproduct of our study of Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. Go back and take a look at what we had to say there. Notice he calls it life's ever modern rapids first. This ever modern will again play into the idea of evolution. And then in parenthetics, we've seen it so regularly. Soon, to blend. Go back to his use of the word twine in Lilacs. With the old streams of death, taking us back, of course, to Song of Myself, Passage 6. We've made this argument that so much of Leaves of Grass is a sustained theodicy. That is to say, an attempt to try to answer the question, why? Why must there be death? Why must there be pain? Why must there be sorrow? And I think borrowing heavily from Plato's great Phaedo, as Socrates is ready to drink his hemlock shake and to go for a little bye-bye trip, he's giddy, he's excited, because he's ready to leave and move on to the next great adventure down, of course, the currents of the stream of time. Notice now we're going to have the bringing together of all that is America, mentioned, of course, in the final line of the poem. Some, that is to say, all these currents, some threading, and then notice all of the mentions. We have Ohio's farm fields or the woods. We have Colorado's canyons from sources of perpetual snow. We have the half-hid in Oregon, and obviously so many rivers. We know this because of where we live, yes, out here in the West, that so much of the water of the West comes from the mountains as they will find their way into streams and then ultimately rivers, and then some of them finding their way to the ocean. Oregon, or southward in Texas, notice he's moving geographically all over the place. Some of the north to Erie and Niagara and Ottawa and Atlantica's Bay, and so to the Great Salt Brine. In other words, all rivers finally run to the sea. And then he pauses and he points out the intimacy of this poem. In you, whoever you are, my book perusing. The idea of Leaves of Grass is chasing. We're chasing, it's chasing, right? In I, myself, in all the world, these currents flowing, all toward the mystic ocean tending. And of course, mystic is used profoundly in Song of Myself, Passage 23, if you want to run that to ground. And you'll remember that this idea of tending and the unknown currents of Song of Myself 33 will come to mind. Currents, again now, the next stanza, for starting a continent new. We'll finish, of course, with the use of America. And like I told you guys, any time that Whitman uses the word America, it is significant, it's important. I hear America singing and the like, right? Currents for starting a continent new. Overture, we've commented on the influence of music, and not just symphonic, but operatic music for Whitman. Overture sent to the solid out of the liquid. That is to say, again, the ways that movement happens. Okay? Fusion of ocean and land. I've said this before to you guys. I think that T.S. Eliot was very influenced. We're going to mention 2 at 3A here in a second. But think about Dry Salvages. And we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net over all of the 4 poems of 4 quartets. But Dry Salvages, the way in which these lines will play so heavily, in especially Dry Salvages 1. Fusion of ocean and land, tender and pensive waves, and then in parenthetics, not safe and peaceful only, waves roused and ominous too. The theodicy argument. In other words, life is about both. We must have birth, but we also must have death, as we are thinking, and as I am especially thinking of the passing of my dear colleague today. We must have both, and they fuse, they go together, the way, of course, rivers flow, like the creek intends sleep, no question, right? Out of the depths, that phrase used only one time in All Leaves of Grass, it's right here. Out of the depths, the storm's abysmic waves. Abysmic gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here. Who knows whence? So notice, one never knows how a life is lived and where it flows to, and the ways in which Whitman himself is hoping that his poetic project will flow. I mean, I think it would be interesting if we could have some way to let Whitman know, maybe Whitman does now see us having these conversations with all of his poems. I find it remarkable. Raging makes us think of Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle. Raging over the vast, the abysmic and vast, with many a broken spar and tattered sail, makes us immediately think of, oh, Captain, my Captain, has America been through the storm and finally made it to the harbor? Oh, Captain, my Captain says, you bet. Absolutely, it's happened. Of course, tragically with the loss of Lincoln. Or, from the Sea of Time, it's as if he's musing almost. Or, from the Sea of Time, the only use of that phrase in All Leaves of Grass is right here. Collecting, vasting, the way he stacks these ing words together, all, and his use of that word is significant. I bring a windrow drift of weeds and shells, again, out of the cradle endlessly rocking. What is it that gets washed up? That is to say, in terms of the inspiration, the poetic inspiration of great artists, what is it that gets washed up? Oh, he says, little shells. And now we'll begin a 10-line stanza that is ultimately just a rhetorical question. It's beautiful. Oh, little shells, so curious, convolute. His use of the word curious, we pointed out. And I think if there's a single word that captures Whitman, and I'll say it for my pal Kevin Tonkovich, it's that word curious. The people we love the most, it seems often, are those who are constantly curious all their lives. They're always wanting to know more, learn more. And I think Whitman is the great exemplar of that for all of us. Notice, curious, convolute, so limpid, cold, and voiceless. Will you not, little shells, to the tympans of temples held? I love that, tympans of temples. Just the rhythm of that phrase is brilliant. Murmurs and echoes. We've said that T.S. Eliot learned to use the word echoes, I think, from his study of Whitman. My words echo thus in your mind, but to what purpose? Disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Still call up eternity's music. Only time that phrase gets used in Leaves of Grass. Faint and far, wafted inland, sent from Atlantica's rim, strains for the soul of the prairies. It's as if Whitman is somehow going to merge and become, the way creeks become rivers, become ocean, merge with America. And of course, the center of America, the prairies. Whispered reverberations, chords for the ear of the West, notice capitalized, joyously sounding, the way that the river or the creek seems to be singing. Your tidings, old yet ever new. I told you, we learned this from our study of Whitman long ago in 303, that the new is the new. The NEW is the KNEW, right? It's all cyclical. The old yet ever new and untranslatable. Of course, you'll remember passage 52 of Song of Myself, right? That is to say, shall we just go back for a few moments to that very final lines of Song of Myself and passage 52. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me, complains of my gab and my loitering. These are some of Kevin Tonkovich's favorite lines in all of Leaves of Grass. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable, there's your word. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor in the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drifted in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. The way, of course, rivers will find their way into the ocean. Infinitesimals, only use of that whole word in Leaves of Grass. Back now to the poem. Out of my life, and many a life, and then in parenthetics, for not my life in years alone I give all, notice the repetition, all I give. These waves, again, this wafted in waves from the deep. By the way, only use of waves is here. Cast high and dry, washed on America's shores. That is to say, Whitman wants to be the poet that collects all of the stuff of his life and puts it there on the shores of the country that he loved. I find it a fascinating poem. At 2A for our messages, well, I think the argument here is that the greatest poets always somehow subsume everything prior. They transcend and include, and that's the people that we're most moved by, again, as I'm dedicating this lecture to such a great, great scholar and thinker and teacher as Kevin was. No question, he subsumed so much of the past to provide so much of the future. At 2B, the powerful symbol of the river, I think, is compelling, and here it works so brilliantly. And then I love that last 10 lines of a rhetorical question. At 3A, we've mentioned T.S. Eliot's Dry Salvages. I will mention Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. Also, T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, one of Kevin's greatest and favorite poems. Just think about the compelling picture of those final words, I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. That idea, till human voices wake us and we drown, at the conclusion with mermaids singing each to each. And Tennyson's Ulysses, a poem that as well my colleague Tonkovich loved so much, and he loved to hear it quoted. I am part of all that I have met, yet all experiences and art where through gleams that untraveled world is margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use as though to breathe more life. Life piled on life for all too little, and of one to me, little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. And this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. I think we're playing a very similar game here. Finally, at 3B. What or who has caused the currents of your life? If your life is a river, from what springs, what creeks has created that majestic river that is your life, your precious life? And of course, who are the important currents that you are going to provide? I mean, to what degree do you share your life with others, and in the process, well, we're always reminded that in the end, the rivers always find the sea, as Kevin finally today has found his sea. Thank you.